Hey everybody, what's up? It's Booksy. Today is Tuesday, August 8th. This is going to be a kind of a review of what we talked about on stream today. Earlier in the day, I streamed for a couple hours this morning just to talk about stock price only. During that time, we talked about the importance of 520. We talked about the importance of a possible pullback down to 490. And we talked about the setup here and how the setup, even though there was this spike to the upside that ended, red thus far today, it's still not in a position where I would say it's overtly bearish, meaning that there's a strong possibility here for a pretty significant move to the upside. One of the things that's important to note is that oftentimes when we get to this place where we have a rising accumulation, which is what this looks like, it looks like a pump followed by a gentle pullback, a pump followed by a gentle pullback, so on and so forth. You'll often get some patterns such as a widening or a narrowing. If you go back to, let's say, March, the big March run up, and you look at something like that, there's a very similar patterning that occurs after that initial move, and that patterning results in what appears to be a large channel move. But the channel move itself isn't, as you can see here, isn't always evident right away. Sometimes it might look like a rising wedge. Sometimes it might even look like what I call the beak, right, where it looks like this kind of parabolic move upward. And then other times it could even look like a widening. The importance here is not so much that this pattern exists, more that it is oftentimes a bearish pattern, meaning that usually if it reverses, it would appear that the stock would come back down. I believe this is often used to entice shorts to try to jump on it. And I think that in this particular case with the widening spread, it's not exactly all bad, okay? Now, that being said, yes, if you take a straight up trend through here, you can see that at this particular moment, it does appear that we're creating a massive hook right now. You can see we coasted down. This morning we had a jump over the local creek here. Then we came back up. We redistributed, right, over top of it. And then we came back down and pushed a little bit lower. Both areas this morning did not have bearish volume, and I made a point of that during the earlier stream today, that basically, if you look closely, most of the volume on this sell-off begins around 526, and a lot of it is kind of congested in this bottom area. And the same thing applies here. You can see there's a strong volume spike at the bottom here. That's very good. The whole setup here where you've got these strong volume spikes end of day usually going into the next day, these are indicative of accumulation because, as you can see, it's being bought back up very quickly. So instead of being able to kind of gently press it down continuously, anytime it's going low, we could split this kind of ascending channel here into two parts. Anytime it's going low, it's being bought back up very quickly. That's the sign of accumulation. Also a sign of accumulation, typically you end up having kind of a slow top, meaning it's sort of rounded because, again, pressing the price down causes buy-in. So you get a lot of kind of this slow, methodical, very light volume tops. If you look at the volume patterns here, all three of these tops on this walk-up have pretty low volume on that top. And that's a good thing in general, okay? Now, all of that being said, what happened this morning on the earnings wasn't entirely unexpected. I did expect us to come up possibly to this like 460 mark. I talked about it on the previous day. I said that when we got up here, I said, we might coast around 515 just to trade that area a bit. This is a previous supply zone. When we walked down on this S-curve, this was the first cat ear area. So naturally, this is acting as a pretty heavy supply zone. You're going to have some times where you're going to be faced with a resistance, and it's going to take time to move over it. There's got to be some seller exhaustion. And quite frankly, I'm not really concerned that much with the current selling volume that we saw. Yes, there was an uptick in selling volume early this morning, but I just showed you a lot of that volume is on these bottoms. And I'm not really feeling like this is a massive sell-off at this time, probably because it hasn't broken down just yet. We really haven't seen a breakdown of that widening. Once we do, if we do, I should say, see a breakdown of that widening, yeah, if you make a low beneath $5, I do think it's likely at that point that you're going to look for that 490 hit that we talked about. I believe it would be a good thing. I don't think that it's necessary to move forward. In fact, they might leave this gap slightly open, right, to tease out shorts, to make them think that it's going to go down. It's only an effective trap if it helps to bring more shorts into the play. At this particular time, the reason that I'm less bearish than I was when we were over here, right, is that we're basically creating another top just like we saw back here, which resulted in what? Well, an ascending accumulation. This is kind of what we see oftentimes when we cross like the final creek, okay? And what I mean by that is that when you get to the edge, right before the breakout point, right, and we had talked about 525 and how I didn't think it was going to run until we got over 525 and held it as support. Well, that means that that's the wall, right? So if you look at the creek from this point forward and you go to the previous top up here around 620 and you drag that line down. Now, a number of ways you could do this, right? You could go to the top from Monday, which is yesterday, up here at 527. You could now decide that the top is higher because it pushed higher. Technically, yeah, it had a higher resistance. You could be looking at these two cat ears coming down here. I think locally, we are talking about a local creek cross at this point. Presently, that's going on right now. I think you're getting a slight hop, right, over this downtrend. That's all fine, okay? What I would do predominantly, though, is I would look at this and I would think about it as a series of resistances. And yeah, I've got a line drawn here that kind of shows the resistance from yesterday and how it's navigating that marker. Does it look kind of like a trajectory, right? It's just kind of following along right now. But the top, you'll know, is more or less lower. It's right here. And I would even draw it with maybe a curved line and say, yes, this is where our quote-unquote price resistance is. It's not that surprising. Again, this has been pretty normal for us ever since we pushed up. I think it's been very predictable, I should say. My anticipation was that we were going to possibly push up to the top here, maybe get to the top of this gap. I said perhaps based on the target that I found, it could be up to as far as 555. I believe in after hours price action, we might have come up to that area and 560. I'm not looking at it right this second. I can't verify that, but it came up there. It did what was expected, and then we opened, and I had anticipated that if we did come up, we would probably on earnings come down to that 490. The reason that 490 is so important isn't because there's a small gap there. It's not. That's not the important thing. The importance of that 490, 492 area is also not that, yeah, there was support over here and so on and so forth. I could go through a number of reasons why it's significant locally, but the biggest thing is the macro creek. We jumped that macro creek on this move. If this is a breakaway gap and we're leaving those gaps behind us because of that breakaway volume, this small little breakaway right here would also be part of that because we had to jump over the creek, which we lost on this S-curve back down. The reason that I was feeling very bearish last week for most of the week was because we were still underneath that macro creek. In the past, when AMC has done an S-curve through the creek, the main creek that it needs to cross in order to get a run going, it often comes up and hooks, which means it comes up, it tests that resistance again, it decides, yep, this is supply, and then supply dumps it down. What happened last week is that we got that higher low, and then we started to make higher lows consistently until that final move, which then bled over into the Monday push-up. At this particular venture, what you would expect to see, at least what I would expect to see, to have like a healthy move to the upside, would be that push back down. So again, pressing up, going to test the next resistance up, and then perhaps coming back down to find the next point of support. Yes, it could be right where it's at. This is in line with the other supports that it's had. It hasn't broken out of that widening yet. But even if it did, I would have expected it to come to 490, right? This is another uptrend, which comes back from the beginning of this entire movement from back over here, which is July 20th. And not only that, but 490 as a significant level of support. You can see it's a liquid support right here, and it's the macro, right? The macro breakout. So for us to come back and do even a soft check on this, just to check the liquidity and get that buy-in, this would be very consistent with what we see normally on an AMC breakout move after essentially what is, I don't want to call it an SOS itself because it's not, but a pretty powerful first move, right, with a backup. And this backup being a possible LPS. We're not 100% sure yet. We have that bearish possibility if there's a breakdown, all right? Beyond that point, yes, 470. Now, I made a point to say that 470 as a fib level makes sense. It's also a pretty important level going back, looking at the recent 7 or so months of the stock. Really, most of our gaps have happened beneath 470, $4 to 470. We've had a lot of liquid gaps. There's been a lot of trading done in this lower area. It might make sense to come back and check 470 again. You might be looking at this saying, well, wait a minute. If you come down to 470, you're breaking that macro creek again. How could that be a good thing? If you're going to tease out the shorts, you got to give them something to bite on. You cannot possibly have a good short trap if there's nothing for them to bite on. Was today's downward push enough? It might be. And they might leave that breakaway here even. It's not the biggest one. I wouldn't even say it's a breakaway technically, but it is a push above the macro creek. It is very significant. Could they leave that behind and just not go for it? It's possible. But that wasn't what my expectations were. My expectations were that we would get this push down. We would come back to at least 490 and then possibly even come back to nearly 470. It would need to make a higher high than this 468 or whatever it was that we hit previously. Okay. But what would that do? Well, it would tease out shorts into thinking that this was a breakdown of this upward trend. It would tease out shorts thinking it's a breakdown of the macro creek. This is kind of like the nail in the coffin, right? This is where shorts would say, okay, you've lost it. Now we're just going to go way low, right, down to the 450s. And we've already been there, so we can push through that and probably go all the way back and fill that gap. That's a great enticement. So if you're going to have any kind of a bear trap at all, if that's the goal here from the long operator, you want to see 492 break, okay? If the long operator doesn't care about it, then they're not going to worry about pushing it down beyond what's already kind of been done. I think 490 would be enough. I really do. And typically on breakouts like this, you get that walk up, you get that pullback, and then immediately you spring back into a sort of SOS. That would occur. It's like a localized, is what I'm talking about, like a localized sign of strength right here at around 550 before that gap fill. That would be pretty typical for AMC. And beyond that, yeah, we're looking at way up high at like $6. So we're still sitting in really good shape. Yeah, it's a little out of order, you know, from what we talked about, but the price levels that we talked about have thus far been pretty reliable. We pushed up, came back down. What's important to note, and this is what I'm going to kind of end with on this video today, because I'm just going to keep it very brief, is that typically when we're doing any kind of a creek cross, you have what we have is the M shape, right, which is basically just a push against a creek, right, to press the creek higher. Then you have a pullback, you have a last point of support, and then you jump the creek. You might check it once. And then typically what you're going to do is you're going to see it move back down and retest near the last point of support. So in this case, the last point of support was down here at like 420. After the M cross, a lot of times you're going to come back to either a high liquidity zone, which is already pretty up high, you know, right here, or you're going to come back to the last major point of support. In this case, it comes back to pretty much right where it entered the range, right around that 50% mark, and that's where it takes off from. Okay, it makes a higher low. It's not as low as it was over here when it was at 417. It's just enough to go back, grab some liquidity. And not only that, but it's an effective short trap. You can see that right before it breaks down, you can see this uptrend. Right before it breaks down, it creates that hook, and it creates the illusion of a big drop. And then almost immediately, very quickly, it comes back up and it takes off. So if we're talking about, again, this concept of, well, we may be doing the same kind of thing right now. Okay, so what are we seeing? Well, you have that localized jump. Okay, so you have the M shape that came across. You've got like a soft test on it. Could this continue to go sideways and down for a time? Yeah, but this is kind of a do or die situation. It's a lot bigger. We're right around earnings. There's just a lot that could happen right here, and it could be a very strong reactive move down or up either way during the earnings call this afternoon. I'm saying all of this because if you look at the big picture here, right, on the whole, this is actually quite the same. It's very similar, right? You get this kind of mirrored shape on the left and the right. You get the sine wave that's also diminishing, right, and getting smaller and smaller and smaller, pressing down back to the point of support. You've got the same kind of concept happening right now. You've got that same left and right side move. You've got that up-down flush. You're kind of testing the waters now, I think, to see if you're going to make that big drop. And I said early in the week that I thought it was probably going to be after hours today that we might see that significant slide. We'll see. We'll see how far it goes. All I know is that this is fairly typical of AMC, and it often does look like it's breaking a trend. In this case, it almost looks like about to be breaking what? Well, I think a lot of people might have looked at this and said, yeah, it looks like a breakdown of what? A wedge, which would have been probably thought of as like a bear flag. Okay? And in the end, it ends up reversing and goes the opposite direction. Doesn't give bears a chance to misread this. Okay? It just doesn't. There's very little time spent on the push up and the move out. It's quite literally like within a day's time. So very quick. All right? And then you have this massive move. Again, I'm saying all this because it's fairly normal for AMC to do something like this. So at this particular point in time, what is my expectation? Well, you see how this is sort of like an acceleration right here of what we're seeing over here? It should be doing something fairly similar as a response if you get that higher low. And the higher low isn't higher than these previous ones. It's not. It's specifically like how low did this go, right? On the one hand, you could look at it and say, look, we found support at 490. I think that's as low as it needs to go. It could still do that fake out breakdown here and come back up, just like it did in this particular case. But you could also say, well, it did find support on the downward side at 470 as well. I think both would be valid arguments for a possible slide here before a reaction back to the upside. In either case, there's only one thing you got to watch out for, and that is a slide with a hook. You cannot have on this reactive move, you see this reactive hook move? You cannot have it close outside of the structure. And what I mean by that is if, for example, this thing did have a slide and then it closes here low and we start witnessing what could only be described as like lower lows, this is not the bullish situation. It is not a trap, right? This could be a situation where you just straight up are making a hook. And it's going to be hard to tell until it's done. If you want to wait for confirmation, the confirmation is going to be when you get that close back above this creek, this downward creek here, this upward creek here, and the super macro creek here. All right, the big one. Once it comes back above these three, it's go time. I think it's very likely that you're going to get a nice strong move back up and you're going to press to the upside. From a Bukowski standpoint, if this breaks down, this widening breaks down right here, you would come all the way back to near bottom. So you would come all the way back potentially to that 470 mark as it goes. So again, I'm using a little bit of a mixed bag of TA here. Some of it's a little bit more of a pattern analysis. Some of it's more of my own stuff with a sine wave and creek crossing. And some of it is just straight up Wyckoff and volume analysis. What I'm saying is that thus far, this looks pretty good. And it hasn't made a signal yet that it's going to do something like this and then basically fail. I don't see the volume there from shorts. I'm not seeing it in that move. If this did happen, then yeah, I'd be worried that we would probably see a slide pretty low, maybe even to that 430 mark if this does happen. This is very typical of AMC on a breakdown. And again, it all really just depends on volume. Thus far, everything that's been happening is happening really high up. It's been ascending and it's been happening high up. It's just like this in relation to the previous area. It hasn't made those lower lows. So right now, everything looks really good. On APE side, I was very concerned about APE as a possible bearish turn here could be happening. I mentioned this morning there was a hook here. This reminds me a lot of that typical four top area that we see or where you get that push up into that cat ear that then fails. It did create a hook on this particular uptrend here, which is the last known creek right here, these last points of support. On the low end here, it came back up, tested it, rejected it. That's also a rejection on a major downtrend creek that you can see from going back to the previous tops way over here in February to where we are now. So right now, it's kind of just sitting in the middle zone. Could this be a fake out that then reverses to the upside? Sure. It's not happened yet. Right now, all that's happened is it created a hook, rejected. It looks like it's going to come down and try to test. If it makes a lower low than 171, this is what I mentioned earlier today, I might be like, look out below, because you start dropping down to 164, this is where you're going to have some problems. If this were to break down, ultimately, this is the zone that it's going to happen in, right around that 164. It's going to coincide with this upward move breakdown. And if that happens, I have a price target that's very low, but that works really well mathematically, and that is an 80-cent price target. It's a really critical level, 81 cents for the stock. It would pair really well with the combo chart if AMC had to move to $10. In addition to that, the price target here with the perfect 50% rotational symmetry around it leads you to that price target on roughly September the 13th and 14th, which is futures expiration date. Now, I'm not saying this is definitely going to happen or it's imminent. I'm not saying there couldn't be some crazy turnaround here. But I am saying that from my point of view, if you flip the chart upside down, I think the bears have a pretty strong case here for a possible continuation back to the upside. I think they do. I think they're also pressing against a creek. I think we're kind of just smushed between two possibilities. And I don't really see how you could argue it otherwise, because at this point, there's been high volume, which is typically more distributive, but there hasn't been high volatility, which is more accumulative. We've had these kind of Antara shakeouts. We've had some pretty major buy-ins here that look more like accumulation to me, where you've got this really strong buy-in on a bottom here, but it could have been just a short covering, right? I think if you make a creek jump one way, you've got a really strong chance of that price target hitting. And then I think if you make a creek jump the other way, you've also got a pretty strong chance of a higher price target hitting. And I would say that that price target is likely up near $5. All right. Right now, it is bottlenecking. It is absolutely coming to the end of its rope here. It's going to make a decision. Now, I don't want it to look like it has to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be all or nothing all the time, but it's definitely in a position where it's wound up, and I would expect a big move. So that's it. That's all I got for you right now. I'm not going to talk about the combo chart or the deviation chart during this video. I want to keep it really brief. Just before the earnings call this afternoon, just kind of want to know what to look out for, what levels to watch. If it does come down, I'm watching that 470, I'm watching 490. Those are the big ones for me. If we do get a break to the upside, I really just want it over 525. I just want it to find support up here. Right around 520 up to 530 would be great. Finding support here with another push back to go fill that gap would be really strong. We're not quite there yet. I don't think we've broken out of this main creek here, and I think that once we do, we'll see some strength, and I think this could be a very parabolic move up to the top. But we're not there yet, and so we kind of have to wait and see what happens. I would not at all be surprised to see that dip down here with a recovery, even if it dips pretty low. So that's all I got for you today. Hope you guys have a great one. Sorry about the noise in the background. Something dropped off my desk. But I appreciate you hanging out, and I will talk to you later.